Mike, can you see me and you in front of the slides? Am I sharing the cover slide?
Yeah.
Cool. There used to be subtitles somewhere. I would like to activate that for anybody who would benefit from that, but I can't see it now. I found it earlier today. Hmm. No, I can't find it now. Okay, people are coming in this time. Good afternoon, everybody. We are 2 minutes before 3 p.m. before this starts off, so we will just give it a minute or two before we kick it off. Time to finish that coffee, Mike. It's recording. All right, it's exactly 3 p.m. on my clock. Mike, shall we kick it off? I think people are still coming in, so but we can slowly kick it started, right? Okay. So welcome everybody to this Q1 2025 webcast on a funding strategy for nonprofit organizations. I'm really pleased to have this conversation right now in these interesting times. And I am particularly pleased to say that my good friend and colleague, Mike, is joining us today. Mike, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, great to be here, Chris. I'm Mike Wright. I'm the Director of Communications and Membership at BOM, so we're a UK body which represents international development organisations. Yeah, and definitely some interesting times, which we'll no doubt discuss over the next few minutes.
Absolutely. My name is Chris. I'm the Managing Director of MZ International. My colleague Tony Ann, I'm afraid, is off sick and won't be able to join us today because she has no voice and and she sounds like a parrot. Basically, not that she repeats what everybody says, but the voice sounds very coarse. So I'm afraid you're gonna have to make do with myself and Mike today. We are obviously diving right in. This is a webinar of our short webinar series. So the idea is to stay within half an hour, 45 minutes. That's the idea. So we should be done by 4:30, 4:45 here in Europe time. A bit of sort of housekeeping. The Q&A section is open for everybody who wants to ask a question. Please put your question in there. Please do not put it in the chat because we tend to miss it there. Hopefully we get around to all questions, if any. If there are any questions we don't get around, then my colleagues and I will answer those by email in the next few days. Finally, the session is recorded. The recording will be shared. We've had around, it's a smaller group today. We've had about 200 signups for this one. So those who can't join here by in person will be able to view the recording later on. A survey will also go out after you so that we continuously improve our knowledge provision and our advice to the sector. I would be eternally grateful if you could respond to that survey. The idea of MZN as a social enterprise, after all, is still, since 2011, to build better nonprofit organizations. And that depends to a large degree on what it is you are telling us that you need. With that said, let's dive in because time is running out. The first point that we would like to also ask Mike here straight away is a contentious one. The question comes here: is the age of grant-funded organizations simply over? And then a more optimistic one: does it even matter to how we create impact? Those are two questions that are seemingly in a juxtaposition. But before we dive into this very colorful design here, Mike, you work with a lot of your members, so I'm going to ask you straight. Are your members going back to basics? Are they soul searching a lot in these difficult times with Trump and receding grant funding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, I mean, 3 or 4 weeks ago, people were thinking it's bad enough, cost of living crisis, UK ODA being down to 0.5%, but the two shocks of the last few weeks have been well. People are still working their way through it. So there's USAID cuts, obviously, or stop work process, and what looks increasingly like the complete dismantling of USAID,
Yes.
pending the courts. And then yesterday, of course, the announcement that UK ODA was going to be cut from 0.5% to 0.3% over the course of 2 years. So basically a 40% cut by April 2027. So yeah, in answer to your question, there's two, organization, one of the things, so what have we been saying for the last 10 years? We've been saying diversify your income streams, don't be too reliant on government funding. What is the USAID situation exposed? Huge reliance on government funding. Some organizations, about 20% of the organizations we surveyed had 60% or more dependency on USAID. So
60, you said?
60%,
Wow.
more than 60%, yeah.
Okay.
And a good chunk, about 25%, were between 20 and 60%. So really high exposure. So I mean, I've come from conversations just since yesterday where people are saying, is this the end of ODA, and does that matter? Does that matter? It's a question that people are asking. Certainly, it feels like also the end of possibly the end of thinking about grants as well. Certainly, government grants. So there's definitely a sense in which this is so cataclysmic, so big, that people are drawing a line in the sand about what they think about where their funding will come from, and it does feel like a.
But I'm gonna slightly challenge you there, because we had a conversation here. We're going off script already. I would ask the question: has it ever really worked? Ever? I mean, even before Trump and even before the UK receding, the Netherlands have cutting their ODA, overseas development assistance, their grant funding massively as well. Even before these three countries cutting massively back, humanitarian shortfall based on the 2023 Global Humanitarian Overview, revealed by OCHA, UN OCHA, by the way, revealed a 35 billion shortfall, with 70% of the humanitarian needs being unmet financially. Even pre-pandemic, over to the development side, the UN ICT said, look, there is a 2.5, and now we're talking trillions annually shortfall in meeting the SDGs just in developing countries or transitioning countries, whatever we're going to call them. And the IPCC here in Bonn, the International Panel of Climate Change, they've resigned themselves to not give a number, but just said, look, it's basically trillions of dollars are needed just to address the global energy and infrastructure investments to keep warming to 2 degrees. So this very idea, what I'm saying with these massive numbers, is, in a very pragmatic way, if we're an organization that relies on taxpayer funds, has this ever been a viable strategy?
Yeah. No. In a way, so one of the things that it's very appropriate questions, is one of the points that was made in a meeting just earlier today was somebody saying, "Remember how tiny, and partly this was a message to the Labour government. What they're cutting, relatively speaking, is a small amount of money, and actually, a small amount of money is not going to do all the things you've just described, Chris. So yeah, even fully funded, it's always going to be insufficient. So and I think so. In a way, it's always been overblown. I know obviously really essential in lots and lots of cases, but fulfilling 0.7% is not going to be the cure all for development funding.
Right, right. So I want to get back to a conversation we've had with our MZN partners. MZN works with around about 300 partners every year, and we had a workshop from which this slide is derived from, and they went back to, that was pre the shock of the 20th of January and what's happening in the UK. So they were still in a very positive, constructive mindset, ladies and gentlemen, and they said, look, it doesn't really matter. We are an organization. Our funding model might need to change more drastically than we hoped, even though people like Mike, you've been saying this for 10 years. And I include myself explicitly into that as well. But what we do doesn't. And how do we develop impact? And this is the first sort of, I think, positive news today. If we're looking at how an organization delivers impact, I think it's worthwhile briefly going back to the value drivers, or the impact drivers in this case, about what we do, and they don't change from the funding methodology. So you're designing chiefly value or impact value by your results, by your operational efficiency, through the innovation you foster or you allow or you drive even, and finally, very pragmatically, through your funder, not donor, funder understanding and the degree of the quality of an engagement with the funder community. And one of our CEOs at a sprint meeting has put this very succinctly, and I think it's worthwhile repeating here, saying, you know, after we basically spent 4 days in a room really going down to the brass metal here. But basically we said, look, we're pretty clear right now that there are 4 value drivers that ultimately drive our success, just 4. And the funding strategy needs to support and reflect that. And I thought that was I mean, I'd love to hear your view on this one, Mike, but I thought that was a very pragmatic way of thinking about it by this team. I'm tied by confidentiality here, because they said, like, look, we can't change the Trumps and the Labour parties and what the Dutch says. But we can control these 4 value drivers. Do you think it's possible for your members to get into this constructive mindset, or is it all panic?
No, I think whilst there's a state of shock, I think there's lots of interest in rethinking what the kind of paradigm is and how an organisation. Conversations about organizations and how they deliver value. So definitely that's becoming. When we asked CEOs recently, you know, we did a bit of sort of survey around, or what do you want to hear from Bond?
Yeah.
What issues do you want to talk about when you come together? And we were expecting them to say, oh, we want, you know, big name speakers to speak to us for an hour and drinks afterwards, and we have a nice chat. And they didn't say that. They said, actually, we want to talk, the things that we share in common are not so much all the multiple issues we work on, but actually running a not-for-profit ethical business and deriving and how we deliver the best value through that business. So there's a definite sense in which, if we'd asked that a year ago, they would have said, oh, you know, we'd like Secretary General of the UN to come and speak to us. But actually, no, they actually want to spend time and actually spend significant amounts of time talking about organizational value.
Yeah, and I feel that as well, and that's very timely with what we're doing next right now, because my colleagues at MZN and myself, we've sort of put it into as succinctly as possible into a 3-steps approach, you know, about how we tackle this one. And it's very basically starts very internally, looking in what you just said, Mike, you know, looking at what do we need to do, how do we look in our organization, how do we actually change, and that's something we need to mention here: localize, prioritize innovation, and possibly merge. Actually, then it's a look around our organization. You know, what donors and how can we best engage, and what value should we present to those? So symbolized by a little rocket. And then finally looking ahead. You know, let's stop playing catch up and be continuously surprised by the developments. And with all due respect, I think it's worthwhile saying we shouldn't be too surprised. The signals from the UK have been, the last 5 years, reducing. The Trump is pretty much doing what he said he would. And the Netherlands the same. I'm very grateful to report the German election has developed, the cutting of ODA was not a major part, although some cuts are expected. So that's the three things we're going to talk about in the next 20 minutes, and we'll start with looking in, taking stock. So I think what you just said, Mike, when we work with our organizations, we basically find three things. Now, I'd love to hear what you find in these conversations, Mike, when you talk to them. We find that our NGOs talk about localizing, saying, you know, the age of grant funding might not be over, but it looks like it's over internationally. So the role of the INGO grant funding has gotten ridiculously difficult, and there's fewer areas where we can justify that level of overhead and that level of non-localization. So developing a realistic funding goal that centers around communities themselves and local partners is something we've talked about for 10 years, but it has mostly been talked about from a program point of view, not from a business development funding point of view. We find that with venture philanthropists and impact investors and increasingly development finance institutions, they are less and less interested to talk to Brussels, London, Washington, Berlin. I want to talk straight away with Nairobi, Juba, Jakarta, and wherever you are in the world, to be honest. So that localization has to leave the program scale and go into the business development and funding scale. The second part that our NGO partners have telling us is saying we need to more intentionally innovate. We need to identify what it is we're doing well, cut the rest, so and manage new innovative approaches proactively. You know, in the words of one of them, feel free to break things. You know, if we can't innovate, we are not doing that. And then finally, very pragmatically, lots of our organizations are now mapping donors new. So they're conducting a simple donor mapping to identify new funders that align with their existing or their aspirational projects. Mike, I'd love to hear what your members are telling us when they sort of going down and looking into their own organizations.
Yeah, I think localizing is definitely part of it, and I think I think of those three things that you've outlined there, I think INGOs particularly struggle, or bond members particularly struggle with innovation, and I think that's I think it's partly it's a cultural. I mean, we talked about this in the past, but it's sort of there's a bit of a cultural thing. You know, the imposition of log frames and those sorts of things are often kind of work against sort of organisations rethinking and remodeling themselves. And I think that, you know, it's reflected in the fact that there are so few mergers within the sector, because organisations need to rethink the way they do things, focus on what they do best if they're going to merge. And I think that's where organisations really struggle is how to give up some of their ego, power, and so on.
That's a very interesting conversation. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine not too long ago, where we talked about the ego of how we do things, the idea that we can transport a solution and even a way of doing things cross-border and just impose it is still something that is very much baked into our organizations, and that's probably very pragmatically standing in the way of us succeeding. One of my colleagues has developed some years ago the triple networking approach. I want to share that with you. It's a very pragmatic, so that we don't stay so conceptual. It's a very pragmatic approach to drive business development, and it consists of not just the mechanics of identifying, regularly identifying and sending EOIs and RFQs to the remaining grants, but also involves structures that elevate local storytelling to drive an emotional engagement on the one side. So that's more an advocacy storytelling approach. These organizations are purposely building structures and fora in which a marketing and a comms executive from wherever they are based really reaches out to a project field manager in wherever they are based and elevates those stories, almost like a journalist, to the main website, the main talking point of a conference. That could be the farmer in X, or the house carer in Y, or the individual human interest stories, basically. That storytelling, that human interest storytelling structure is then paired with the second bullet point, thematic thought leadership. This is basically a structure where you can geek out, about the finer points of blended finance in my case, or funding strategies, or in the case of a wash engineer, how do we do water sanitation hygiene in a post-conflict area in the Middle East correctly in winter? How do we do winterization correctly in Syria? How do we do community engagement in rural areas, things like that. So really specific questions, so to display the expertise of the organization globally. So these two things are useful, I find, this, because one is a human interest story to drive emotional engagement, and the other is a sort of one engages the heart, one engages the head. And then the global conversations to showcase scale. Well, that's basically your RFQs, your global cross-country proposal writing sessions, and your international conferences. There are like 5 or 6 where every organization should be at annually, so it's not too much, where we showcase that we can do so at scale beyond just a single country. So this was what my colleague entitled the triple networking approach. Does that make a sense to you, Mike, or is that are your organizations doing something similar?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, really interesting.
Oh, I wasn't expecting a whole lot of endorsement here from you. Usually I hear more critical stuff. All right. You've seen this one before. I still find it useful. We should probably redesign it at some point to modernize it, but I think it's worthwhile, ladies and gentlemen, to briefly ask ourselves what funding we really need. So again, Mike, what you just said, this back to basics. And I find that I don't want to go into too much detail here because we're already behind time, but I don't want to do too much here. But basically, this if you don't take anything away from this slide, other than the fact that before we launch to the natural assumption that we're looking at a grant, maybe we should step back a second, at least half a day, and say, hey, are there other funding types that would be a better fit? For example, a service contract, or an outcome-based finance scheme, or a bond. I don't mean your organization, Mike, I mean an outcome bond, or a fundamental business that would make this more sustainable. Is it traditional fundraising? Is it a membership scheme? Should we go for foundations? Even foundations, you could split into large foundations, local foundations. Shall we go into philanthropy or venture philanthropy? And then list them out on the left-hand side by the criteria that are important to you. We've listed out 6 here. If you want to use the fund flexibly, as it says here on the very left, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. If flexibility is important, put that up. If cost recovery and profitability, i.e. your unrestricted maximization, is important, put that up to the top 2 or top 1. If you say, look, we can't spend this much time and money on securing the funding, so maybe let's not go and start a fundraising campaign, because it's just it takes a really long time to get some traction there. Or maybe you need to maximize the level of effort when it comes to managing the funding. A government grant, as you all know, is incredibly labor intensive to manage. These categories will change. There are 20 more examples like these. The point of the slide is not to automatically go for the obvious culprit, which is a international governmental grant. Yeah. The bad solution was we launched our humanitarian impact accelerator yesterday, and one of the impact investors said every time that they're engaging with an NGO, he has a feeling they're looking for the silver bullet, like one funding source that funds the entire program. Wouldn't that be nice? And yes, I get it. It feels more satisfactory, but I think the days of single funding sources are probably over, or have been over for a while, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Mike, anything to add there? I've got another question for you there later, but is there something that you want to correct me on?
that looks spot on. Of course, you know, if you're after cost recovery, then that's another discussion. But you've got to be very careful about ensuring you fully recover your costs and you are charging appropriately.
Yeah, completely right. So step one is what can we do? Ironically, and Mike, I would love to get your view on this one as well from your membership. The UK's largest NGO associate membership body. Ironically, we have lots of organizations who reach out to us who are not yet MZM partners, who then say, look, we need to save costs, and the first cost that goes are those who write proposals, and we are cutting funding in our business development or our proposal writing capacity and our donor engagement capacity because we have too little funds. And I sort of am stumped every time I hear this, saying, well, hang on, the one function that makes you money is the first function you save on. How is that ever going to work out? Is that in your mind? Do you experience the same, Mike? And is that a harsh reaction? Is that a quick reaction, or is there a good reason for it? Help me understand.
I think sort of INGOs or you know, obviously this isn't uniform, but I think it's definitely the case that there's still a kind of residual suspicion about making money and marketing and those sorts of activities, so that they do you know, rather you know, when your financial position is weak, you actually invest in those areas which will bring you money. You don't cut them. It's really counterproductive to do that, and we see that a bit. I mean, Bond itself is just going through a bit of restructuring. We've maintained all our income generating roles, all our fundraising roles, at the expense of other roles, because it's really, really important to keep, you know, for future sustainability, to keep those roles going.
Right. Okay. So it's not something you would save on when you're running short of money.
No, and then, you know, no, not unless you really had to. Obviously, you know, obviously, I think it is always worth testing the numbers and your return on investment, and are you getting the appropriate level of return from your fund? You know, but in a way, it's a very you can be very pragmatic about that and say, and actually, if you have different funding streams, you can see where the highest returns are and where you might want to deploy your resources in and match, you know, and be flexible. You know, don't always sort of say we need 2 people working on this and 1 person working on that. Be flexible about your funding, your personnel capacity and your funding streams, because I think you should be able to move people around to where something is being most effective and most productive at any moment.
But yeah, I agree, but I have one small problem with that. I see with our organizations more and more that they are using program managers as proposal writers and vice versa. And it's almost like they have so what happens all the time in my experience is that they hire a great program manager to run a program of a secured grant XYZ, and then they run that for 2, 3, 4 years. After the project comes to an end, they really want to keep that person, so they ask them, look, go and find your own money, basically, and we're going to work 80 hours out of you right now, so to apply. And then we have a program manager who knows everything about how to manage a great FCDO or EU program, suddenly having to deal with the procurement units of the donors. Because people say, like, oh, well, they know the EU, right? I mean, they've worked with the EU for the last 3, 5, 10 years. But no, they work with program management and reporting. They have very little idea about procurement.
Yeah.
And vice versa, the other way as well. They hire great proposal writers, and then they become program managers. And the skills, just even the personalities, are different.
Yeah.
You know, I would be really careful about, you know, using your program management capacity for proposal writing and vice versa.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, I think that's a very well made point.
It's I mean, I'm just surprised always, you know, this to hear this. Okay, we're running out of time. Goodness me, we should stop talking. So let's have a look around. There's lots of change happening in the funding environment. And lots of our organizations are going back to the brass metal, Mike, as you said. But the three things that they are doing immediately, things that can be done within the next 4 weeks, which is what we want to leave you with, are these 3 steps shown here. So mapping the new donors. We work a lot with with philanthropists who are going more towards venture philanthropists. Investors are saying, look, are we really stepping up? We do not agree what's happening in the UK and the US and the Netherlands. I spoke to GIZ on Monday, and they said, look, we haven't got suddenly more money, but we're going to be a bit more aggressive with pushing the money out. And they are more focused on their existing areas, saying, we want to really, what we plan to push out in Q4 of this year, we're probably going to do now in Q2. Because we are accelerating this one. Some institutional donors we had a conversation with last month even, and large foundations like Gates, for example, they kind of said, like, look, we have every year we have money left, we didn't commit, we probably shouldn't have any money left by the end of this year because we really want to spend it all. They're not changing their thematic area. As I said, they're more focused, but they seem to be pushing funding out a bit more aggressively. And the philanthropists are outright sort of a counter movement to Trump, which is good to see. Good to see. The second tip is we would recommend to all our partners in the world to check their targeted approach material. What we see all the time is that they are approaching a new type of funder, say an impact investor or say a venture philanthropist, and then they reach out to it with material that is clearly written from a grant proposal a year ago to FCDO or to GIZ or to whomever. And that's really, really different. I mean, the institutional investor we had on our webinar yesterday kind of said, like, I get these emails from NGOs, and the first 3 pages are talking about context analysis and the problem statement. What the hell? So what am I supposed to do with that? So the pragmatic tip here is to really tailor your approach material. And then lastly, are you engaging in the right fora? Where do we spend our time? Which conference do you spend your time at? There's probably a few conferences like the European Development Days, which are mandatory for each, but there are much more specialized ones as well, which if you're working in water, security, advocacy, legal assistance, rebuilding infrastructure, climate, whatever, they're engaging in the smaller conferences, I find to be much more worthwhile because it's much more targeted. Mike, question to you. Anything to add to this list? Yeah, I put you on the spot there, sorry.
No, I don't think so. I think the point about targeting your materials is correct. It's a bit like we've all experienced where you get job applicants who've left the details of, who just have a generic job application letter, and they sometimes even leave the name of the previous organization they were applying to in the letter. So yes, I agree. I think you're not going to get funding unless you understand the kind of mind of the funder that you're applying to. You've got to sort of think yourself into the way they think. It's all part of the approach. So you need to be immersed in their way of thinking, be in the spaces in which that you can see them thinking, learn how they operate, and then that's the kind of catalyst for you being able to write effective communications that really hit the spot.
Absolutely. That doesn't mean we are necessarily reinvent the wheel every time, right? I mean, we are often creating.
No, it's standard, really. It's just kind of appealing to your audience. It's a basic piece of. It's basic writing and engagement skills.
Did you just call me basic? Well, no, I mean, no, I get it. You're absolutely right. It's not rocket science. You do not need a consultant for that. I shouldn't say these things. Final, last but not least, let's have a look ahead, ladies and gentlemen. the system, the funding environment is changing massively. So how do we leave you with practical tips? Well, here's 2 or 3 of them. Check maybe that you have a systematic way to update your donor maps on a monthly basis, at least. Things are changing rapidly. Lots of people approaching us with new donor maps. You can also download certain thematic donor maps for water, women rights, I think conflict and peace building now from the MZN website. There's like 100 or so lesser known foundations listed there that give you a head start on your donor mapping. And then ask if there's a coherent way to deepen existing relationships. Is there a way for us to take the relationship we have and continue to deepen it, or just continue it through this slog? I find that often when organizations get some funding from a philanthropist or a donor, they sort of count this one in the bag and stop engaging here. So I would have a look if there's a coherent way of doing this. Is there a flow chart in the organization somewhere to continually tap those relationships and stay in people's mind? After all, if you're not in someone's inbox or in front of someone every 4 to 6 weeks, they tend to forget you exist. The other question, which I'm not going to be part of this webinar, can some or any aspects of your project be modeled to fit impact investment? That means your project must be inherently looking towards financial sustainability in sort of 2 to 6, 7 years. There is a lot of patient capital out there right now, which is happy to fund 4, 6, 7 years. But obviously, there needs to be a reasonable prospect of it being financially sustainable, not even profitable, but sustainable at least, which excludes certain projects, of course, by default, but includes many more than we would ordinarily fund by grant. And then finally, the localization again. We have many organizations who say, look, would this be better done locally? If we just transfer complete control to our local partner, would this have a higher chance of continuing beyond the grant period? And the answer is surprisingly often yes. So Mike, I'd love your view on this again. Is as we look ahead and as we try to get into a constructive way of thinking here in this onslaught, is there anything that you would recommend your members to say, looking ahead, you might want to check this?
In terms of impact investing specifically, or
it can be, but in terms of it's really hard to get into the long-term, medium-term thinking when you don't know how to keep your lights on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I think organizations have got to avoid panicking. They have to look at what's they might have to make. They might have to make really tough decisions in the short term in order to rethink their model for the future. And I think you can see a lot of organizations doing that and doing it over and over again. But I think, I just reiterating what we said right at the start. I think the question of if grant funding is over, or at least if it's not over, it's not something that you should rely on excessively. Well, what are the organizations should be thinking about what the other sources of funding are. Impact investing and some of the methods you've described in this webinar are definitely areas that organizations need to open their minds to. And I think now is, in a sense, there's a real, in all this doom and gloom, there's a real opportunity for the sector, for the UK and internationally, and even international partners as well, to rethink the way they look at the fundamentals of the way they're funded and their sustainability as well.
I completely agree. Thank you so much. There's a wonderful place to end, Mike, as well. We are running out of time in this short series. I was reminded to keep it to half an hour. We're running up to 40 minutes already. So to summarize, these 3 steps, which the slides will be shared with you, we think you can do between 6 months. So looking around between 2 months 2 and 6 and months 3. The looking ahead period obviously can be lengthy, as some donors are not responsive at the moment. But the making these tough decisions that you've just mentioned, Mike, and then really thinking hard but not panicking in the medium term is absolutely essential. If we lose our head, we may as well fold it. Yeah. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, is it. I've got a couple of notices. We're not going to have time for any Q&A, I'm afraid, but we will answer all questions. I received a few of them here. We will answer those by email or reach out to you to discuss them directly as part of our commitment to build NGOs. There are new training courses which we have released specifically in London. We do a proposal writing workshop next month in March. Nairobi and Istanbul, and then more financial management happens in Berlin in November. Then we also have these online courses, which we are making now available free of charge increasingly to small and medium-sized NGOs. The next cohort here starts next week on writing winning proposals, and in May again. They start like every 3 to 4 or 5 weeks. And then we also have a funding a course on sustainable income. So pretty much what we talked about today, also starting on the 3rd of March, which I believe is next Monday. Is that correct? Monday, Tuesday, something like that. And that's it. We would love to stay in touch with you. Please do drop us a line if we can help, if Bond can help. Mike, to you, thank you very much for joining us here today.
As always, yeah, thank you.
I hope it helps. I hope we kept the balance between being positive yet practical and realistic. And thank you, everybody, for dialing in, and I wish you a wonderful day. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.